you very much. Thank you much for your attention that you are here after a talk which, as I imagine, was already very interesting and inspiring. As you heard already, my favorite field is Jewish studies. Therefore, I start with a statement of a rabbi about the importance of deeds, what we do. He writes in a book, this is an Abraham Joshua Heschel. This book is named God in Search of Man. A very famous rabbi in the United States, now already he passed away in the 70s, but he was very famous because he founded Jewish studies in the United States, more or less. And he came from Poland originally. And he has a statement on deeds. He says, "It is in deeds that man becomes aware of what his life really is, in deeds, what he's doing. Of his power, he becomes aware of his power to harm and to hurt, to weak or to ruin, of his ability to derive joy or to bestow it upon others, to relieve and to increase his own and other people's tensions through deeds. It is in the employment of his will, not in reflection, that he meets his own self as it is, not as he should like to be. So the deeds are the way to know oneself, to know who you are." This is his statement. This is an introduction to speak about the virtues. The virtues are the way not only to act in the right way, but also to know what man is, who you are. This is, so for me, this is the bridge to that, what this rabbi says in the old Greek, Latin, and Christian tradition. When Agathon in Plato's Symposium takes the turn in making a speech in praise of love, he speaks about love. He organized his ideas around the four cardinal virtues, the four principal virtues. As you already heard what a virtue is, I don't need to speak anymore about this. Then I speak, namely you know it already, prudentia, justitia, fortitudo, and temperantia. That means prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Very important is the word cardinal here. Cardinal is not the cardinal. It comes from, you know it? Someone knows it?
To lead.
To hang. Hanging, yeah, caro, hanging together. They are interrelated, interconnected. This means if you do not possess one of them, all the others are spoiled. This is important here. And so you do not possess virtue at all. An example, a man might know what is good, know what he must do to get good results, but if he lacks temperance, what is the consequence? His decisions will be swayed by his love for pleasure. He will follow his pleasures. He has a good insight, but he cannot really realize it. Another perspective. One might be willing to risk his life, yet his actions are not guided by reason, by a purpose. A robber who risks his life is not a prudent man. And so he's also not truly a brave man. He does something which is against the concept of the four virtues. The other point about the virtues is that in many cases we cannot really precisely say where the virtue lies. It's a very complicated issue. The right measure is very difficult to achieve, and it is often different for different persons. The idea of the golden mean is here very important. It was formulated by Aristotle. The middle way. This is that in our actions we must seek the right measure and proportion. And this is done by prudentia. It protects us for an excess and a defect. An excessus would be, for example, in courage, if you speak about courage, an excess would be cowardliness, coward. And the other side would be ruthless. That means you have no fear. It's also nonsense. So prudence guides you to a right understanding of a situation and how to act in it. This concept was developed, this became a doctrine, and became, so to say, the fundament of the European mind, and especially for the European consciousness. Today it is more or less forgotten. Speaking about prudence, we see it more or less from the perspective of utility. How to act in a specific situation to gain a goal, to come to a goal. This is, of course, not the perspective of the ancients. It's not the perspective of Plato, it's not the perspective of Aristotle, it's not the perspective of Cicero, it's not the perspective of Seneca, it's not the perspective of St. Augustine, it's not the perspective of St. Thomas of Aquinas, and all the others. Utility is not the center of prudence. What is the center of prudence? The center of prudence is, of course, man himself, who he is. In my remarks today, I want only to confine myself to the so-called mother of all virtues, of prudence. I will not speak very much about the others. Because I'm convinced if that is understood, all the others are also understood. And prudence is the most difficult one. Prudence is the mother of all virtues. In other words, only the prudent man can be just, brave, temperate. And now I add a sentence which is very strange to many people. And the good man is good insofar as he is prudent, because then he is also just, he is also temperate, and he is also brave. He has an understanding of what is good for man. He has an understanding what is good for himself. He has an understanding what is good for society. Now I come to the definition of prudentia. The prudentia is the cause of all the other virtues. I said it already. The cause. A person can have an instinct governance of his instinctual longings, an instinct. But only prudence, the intellectual virtue, transforms this instinctive governance into the virtue of temperance. Then it is also not only an instinct, it is lifted up into a decision so that it becomes a habit. You act not only in one moment, but this is a habit of life. So justice, fortitude, temperance, and are abilities in man, and they achieve their perfection only when they are founded upon prudence. So what does prudence? It helps us to make a good decision. It's an intellectual virtue. Secondly, prudence is the measure of all their virtues. What means measure here? So my thoughts are very much shaped according to the understanding of St. Thomas of Aquinas. What means measure here? Measure means, I have found, for me, this is a very long article in St. Thomas, which is not easy to read. I found for myself a kind of image and a comparison which helped me to understand it. For example, an artist. A work of an artist is always a transcript. Is always a transcript of an idea which he had within himself already in his mind. And this is transferred into reality, the idea becomes a reality. similar to it, the degree of prudence, so the decision of prudence, is the prototype, the pre-existing form, the idea of which all ethically good actions arise. Like an idea of an artist, which is before he does the work already in him, is this understanding of that, what is good, what is necessary to reach the good, the idea which determines prudence. A good action becomes just, brave, temperate only as the consequence of the prototypical degree of prudence. So I have summarized that for me. Third, prudence informs, informa. It gives a form into something. Informa, this is the word. Informa, the Latin word gives it so beautifully. Informa, it gives a form to something. That means it confers upon the virtues. The virtues, as I said, are abilities. The ability, for example, to be just, the ability to be temperate. But the prudence gives the inner form to that virtue, and that means it makes of a virtue an ethical virtue. An ethical virtue, because behind is a decision. You decide this is good, not only a kind of drive, a natural drive. Thomas of Aquinas understands prudence as perfected reason, and this is now very important. Perfected reason. What is perfected reason? A perfected reason has a cognition of the truth of reality. So he says it. What is the truth of reality? The truth of reality. It's not an idea. The truth of reality is that you take regard of reality. You look very carefully what the situation says to you. You take regard to you. You are open to this reality of a situation, and you accept the reality of this situation. This is the first step. And the situation informs you about the truth of the situation. So if you have a child, and you know it has problems, you have to look very carefully. What is the situation of this child? And then you have to, if you compare that, you look at reality, you take regard for it, you accept it, and you are open to it. You don't interpret it at the beginning. You do that, you want to know really what is the matter of the fact. This is connected with this reason perspective in St. Thomas. This is the first step to come to a clear prudent understanding, to have an understanding what the matter of reality is. How do you come? What gives the information of this reality to you, to your mind, to your reason? It gives you an information of the truth of the reality, which is now confronted with, they all said, with the natural conscience. The natural conscience. The natural conscience is that we have in our innermost reality, in our soul, a voice, what was said before, which says to us that the good must be loved and realized. So the situation, the specific situation with which we are confronted, and which we deal in prudence, is confronted with the inner conscience. And these two aspects have to come together. The conscience, the situation which comes to you, a specific situation, and the conscience. And no part can be excluded. The inner conscience speaks to you in this particular situation, how you should act. The ancients had to be able to do that. The ancients gave some rules. And I want to, how man should behave. In order to receive really the reality of a situation, of a person, of everything. What comes to us, what we have to decide upon. The first step is to deliberate, to think about it, to deliberatio, isn't it? Deliberation. The second aspect is to make a judgment, and the third, to decide how to act. Deliberation is determined again. Thomas of Aquinas has three aspects. By a memory. What is a memory which is called the memory of true being memory? What is a true being memory? So you keep in your mind the reality of things and events as they really are. You don't falsify them. You don't falsify them. You don't interpret them with your own ideas. You don't falsify them because Thomas of Aquinas said, this is the most important, the crucial point, namely to make shifts of accents, omissions, slight retouches, displacements, dislocations. You take the reality, you take it, but you interpret it according to your intentions. And this deforms reality. Therefore, a good memory is necessary. Secondly, and this is all necessary to make a good decision at the end, docilitas. Docilitas, to be docile. Docile means to be able to learn, to take advice from others, to not think that you cage yourself into a presumption and of a deceptive knowledge. But if the situation is complex, you have to ask other people. Thirdly, you have to develop a kind of solertia is the Latin word. Solertia. This is a kind of, I translated it, this is cleverness in a way, but it means the virtue of objectivity in an unexpected situation. Many situations are unexpected, and you have to decide. And there you need a kind of objectivity which avoids the pitfalls of injustice, cowardice, and intemperance. This is a quality which you have to learn. If you strive for prudence, you learn it. This is like an instrument, a music instrument, that you play etudes, then you learn more than etudes. You learn music. The same is here with the virtues. This is something which you have to exercise permanently. And then you get something which you didn't exercise. You get more than you did. So we can say trueness to being of memory, open-mindedness, clear-sighted objectivity in unexpected situation. These are the qualities of the mind of a prudent man which enables him to make a good decision. But for the good decision, the fathers they added another aspect which is very important. They said there must be a capacity of foresight. Foresight. You have to, an intuition is necessary. An intuitio, an intuition, an instinct for the future. What happens, whether a particular action will lead to the realization of the goal or not. This cannot, because all what we do is in a way contingent. That means we are not certain with that what we do. We only approach certainty. We need to develop also a kind of intuition. And this is also something which can be developed out of what? From the experience of life as it has been lived. From the vigilance and healthiness of the instinct capacity. From hope. If you have hope in life, this has also an impact of your decisions. And for a Christian, of course, it is also grace, direct grace or mediated by divine guidance. So you pray for it. What are, I'm soon finished, very shortly. What are, for example, aspects which make prudence failing? One is thoughtlessness. The other is indecisiveness. Not to be able to decide. And the reasons for that is, according to St. Thomas, the lack of a proper consideration. You don't think clearly what reality is. Another is that you cannot make really a judgment, which is prudent. And the third is, it weakens also your energy to make a good decision. So I have to admit, there can be false and crooked ways which lead even to right goals. Both. But the meaning of the virtue of prudence is primarily this, that not only the end of the human action, but also the means of its realization shall be in keeping with the truth of the reality of real things. Good ends should be pursued by means which are true. Yes, I think prudence is the mold and the mother of all virtues, the shaping power of our minds which transforms knowledge of reality into the realization of the good. And St. Thomas says, it is the commanding virtue of the conduct of life and the happiness of active life. The happiness of active life, the happiness. And he very seldom speaks about happiness. This is the highest goal what man can reach. Of active life is essentially comprised in this virtue, prudence. Yeah. Thank you.